Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Today I'm going to be talking about the Big Shot. I know there are a lot of other machines that do similar things, the Vagabond, the Cuttlebug, and some others, but today I'm just going to focus on the Big Shot, and most of what I talk about can be done in other machines, but I'm just focusing on this one. So the first thing I want to do is tell you a little bit about what you get, some of the accessories you can purchase. I'm also going to talk about some of the dies. I'll talk about some of the sandwiches, and then I'll go into some of the different techniques besides just cutting. So let's start with what you get. So when you purchase a Big Shot machine, you're going to receive a platform which has 2 tabs, and there are directions on here that shows you how to use them. You have tab 2, tab 1, and then just the plain old platform. And then you'll get 2 acrylic plates. And you can see my plates are very worn, they're very scratched, they're warped. I had my plates for several years and decided that I should invest in some new ones, and when I did, my new ones looked just like my old ones within just a few months. So I wouldn't worry too much about the scratching, it's normal. And what you want to keep in mind is that your plates are always for your cutting edges. You never want to put your cutting edge directly onto your platform. So you're always going to put it in between here or using one of your accessories. So let's talk about the different things that you can purchase in addition to what you receive with the Big Shot. Okay, I moved my machine out of the way so we can have a little bit more space. My favorite accessory is the magnetic platform. So this is just like your regular platform, except it does not have tab 1 and tab 2. So really what you're using this for are the wafer thin dies that look like this. Just kind of very thin dies, and that's what you would use, and they stick to your magnetic platform. Again, you don't want to put the cutting edge into your magnetic platform. You want to put the dies in between your acrylic plates, and even if your plate is warped, you'll still get the magnetic pull. That was kind of my worry. But you could see it does pull, and it doesn't move, even if you have a warped plate, which I do. So that's my favorite accessory. The next thing that I find useful is this impressions pad, and I use it with some of my sandwiches, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But I also use it with this silicone rubber pad to do dry embossing. And so, like for example, when you have a die like this that has dry embossing and also cutting, you can use this to make sure that you get these embossed lines. So I'll show you what this looks like. Here's a card I made with it. And you can see how you get the dry embossed raised areas in addition to the cone that was cut. And so that's what you would use these 2 primarily for, at least that's what I use them for. Another accessory that I really like, and I just purchased it, is the precision plate. It takes the place of one of your acrylic plates. So instead of having the platform and 2 acrylic plates, you would have the platform, the steel precision plate, and then an acrylic plate. And you always want to face your die directly down so the cutting edge goes toward the steel plate, and then you put your next plate on here and run it through with the platform underneath. Now what you would use this steel precision plate for is when you have intricate dies with a lot of lines and a lot of detail. This provides a little bit more pressure so you get a nice precise cut, and also it is supposed to not warp your acrylic plates so much. So those are kind of the 2 benefits of the steel plate. And one other thing that I have that I use a lot, and it's very inexpensive, are Mylar shims. And I think I got them in a pack of 2 or 3, and they come in a 12 by 12 sheet, and I just cut them in half. But you would just use them with your regular sandwich. So if you have your platform, your 2 acrylic plates, and you have an intricate die and you don't have the precision plate and you want to get a little bit more pressure, you can just add these, or you can add extra cardstock, but I find that these are just thick enough to run through the machine so that it doesn't feel like you're really having to put a lot of pressure, and it does add a little bit extra cut. So anyway, I really like these shims, and I'll have links to all of these. So those are pretty much the accessories that I own. Let me show you a little bit about the different dies that you can use and the sandwiches that you would use with them. The first kind of die I'm going to talk about is called a steel rule die. So they're just thick dies. Inside this foam, so it's this nice squishy foam, inside this line here is a blade that pops up when you run it through your Big Shot, and it cuts your paper. The nice thing about these dies is that you can cut multiple sheets of paper at once. Whereas with the wafer thin dies, like the ones I talked about earlier, these, you can only cut one sheet at a time. Sometimes I've cut two before, but it's a little bit of a stretch to get two. But with this, you can cut multiple, like I've cut 3 or 4 before. You can also cut other materials like wood and felt and things like that. So these are good if you're doing like a bulk and you want to cut a lot of cards at once. These dies are really good. The sandwich you use with this die, you don't use the platform. So you have one acrylic plate, you have the die, and then you have the next acrylic plate. You put your paper right here, and then you run it through. So that's the steel rule die. Now the next type of die is just your typical wafer thin die, and these are very, very popular. There's a lot of different brands, and I think the difference is mostly in the brands is just how intricate they are, but I find that the quality of all of them are very similar. And so the sandwich you would use for this, I like to use my magnetic platform because then my dies can stick to it. And you'll put a plate, you'll put your paper, and then you just put it cut side down where you want it. And then you'll put your next plate and you run it through, you're ready to go. Now if you're using your regular platform, not the magnetic platform, you would use it on tab 2. Put your plate and then your die with your cardstock and then your plate and then run it through. Now I just want to talk quickly about embossing folders. Embossing folders will allow you to do dry embossing, so you have that raised texture to the paper. Many of mine are just this size, and now a lot of them are these 6x6, so you could put your paper in this way, and you can get, these are the trees, you can get them going that way on your card, or you can go like this and get it this way on your card. So that's the benefit of the 6x6, I really like those. And then you have the embossing folders on steroids, which provide a really nice 3D image. I have an example here. This is a basket weave. You can see how detailed that texture is. And the sandwich for this one is a little bit different than the other ones. So the sandwich for your typical embossing folder is going to be to go to tab 1. You'll have your plate, your embossing folder with the cardstock inside, and then you'll have another plate, and then you'll run it through your Big Shot. The same goes for the 6x6 normal ones. Now when you're talking about a We Are Memory Keepers next level embossing folder, these very thick ones, they're very thick. So what seemed to work best for me is actually tab 2. I put my cardstock. Actually, I spray my cardstock first with a little bit of water. Just mist it with a little bit of water because there's so much pressure going into the cardstock that it tends to crack it a little bit. But if you just spritz your water first and then run it through the Big Shot, it'll come out perfectly smooth. So I'll put my paper in here. I'll be tab 2 here. And then I'm going to put my embossing folder directly on here. And I'm going to put the crease where it opens going into my machine first because I found that it really went in there a lot smoother if I started on the crease side. And then I'm going to take my Sizzix Impressions pad, which is a little thicker than a normal acrylic plate, and I'll put it on top here, and that is the sandwich that I use to run through. So these embossing folders are really beautiful. Now let me discuss the different techniques you can use with this. Actually, before I talk about techniques, I just want to talk about storage really quick. I either store my dies in their original packaging. Some of the packaging is really nice. It has a magnetic card to it. But if the packaging doesn't come with anything magnetic, I put them on these Stampin' Storage cards. You can buy them in different sizes. And what's nice about them is they're very strong, but they don't stick together. So I have them all in this box. Stampin' Storage actually sells a box that's wooden. Mine's just a very, very thick, strong cardboard box that I think was made for photos. I got it at a craft store. But you would think that these magnetic cards would stick together, but that's not the case at all. So you'll see as I can kind of go through them and see which one I want to use. And I do this all the time. And I realize that I need a much better organization system. Eventually I want to put tabs and organize them by shape or company or something like that. But right now they're all just sort of random in here, so I have to go through the whole pile when I'm looking for something. But anyway, the point is that these are great for storage. They don't stick together and they're nice and compact, and you can really run through them quickly to find what you need. You don't have to turn pages in a book or anything like that. So I love these. So that's what I use to store mine. All right, the first technique I'm going to talk about is partial die cutting, and that's when you want to cut your cardstock with just only part of the die. I use this most often when I'm making a flip it card, so I'll have a couple of links to some flip it cards so you can see how to do that. But essentially, to do the partial die cutting is here's my magnetic platform, or you can use tab 2 of the regular platform. You'll put one acrylic plate, and then I've drawn a line here, and I've got 2 dies that I'm going to use, and I'm only going to cut half of it so that I get a rainbow. So I've drawn a line here where I want my rainbow to be, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up, let's get this over a little, I'm going to line this up centered on the line. So I've got my 2 circles, making sure that they're just within each other, perfectly on all sides. And then what I like to do is, even though I have a magnetic platform, it does tend to shift a little bit depending on how forceful you are with the plates, and I just don't like to take any chances. So I use this surgical tape. I buy it from Amazon. I got a huge pack of it. It's really not expensive. It's just very thin paper tape that you can use on your cardstock, and then it just comes off without anything left on the cardstock. And sometimes you have to be careful if you really press it down in the Big Shot. You got a really tight sandwich that you have to be careful about removing it from the cardstock so it doesn't tear. But for the most part, I use this because I find it very easy to use, and it is easy to remove most of the time. All right, so I'm going to tape that in place, and then I'm going to take my next plate. Now I'm only going to be cutting this side. So what I'm going to do is I find it easier to put the plate in. You could either put it on this side, okay, and run it through, but I find it tends to shift a little bit more that way. So I like to put mine on this side, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to line it up right with my pencil line. And so the only part that's going to cut is the one that has the complete sandwich on this side. This side is not going to cut at all. So let's go ahead and run this through. I'm going to give it a little push and roll it through. Oops. Okay, so here's my cardstock, and then I'm going to take my tape, and if you want to be careful about this, just keep it close to the cardstock. Oh, it came right off. And then you won't get any issues with your tear. So anyway, here is the cut that I made, and it only cut to that line because that's where my complete sandwich was. So I could then take a scissor and trim this and trim that, or take a blade and trim it, and then I'll have a hole right there once I cut that out. So that's partial die cutting. Another fun thing you can do with your Big Shot is to create a stencil or a mask. So let's say I don't have a Christmas tree stamp, but I have some dies for Christmas trees. I could take this cardstock, this is my magnetic platform, just a wafer thin die, your typical sandwich, and I'll run it through my Big Shot. And what I'm going to get is a stencil or a mask that I can use on some cards. Oh, sorry. Okay, so for example, if you want to ink up some trees, you cut that out, and you can use this as your mask or your die. You can put it in place. I just use, this is the one I just pulled off the circles that I just cut. So you can reuse this tape, and it lasts a long time. So let's say I want to position one here. I can put it into place so that it doesn't move. In fact, I would probably do both sides. And then if you want, you can use a foam applicator or a sponge dauber, and then you can just ink up your Christmas tree. I tend to use a twisting motion. I twist, pick up, twist, pick up, and that makes sure that your mask does not move. And then when I'm done, I can just take that off, and I have a beautiful Christmas tree. And then if you wanted to do another one, let's say in front of it, place it back down, pick a different color, and then lift that up, and now you have 2 trees. So that's a fun way to stretch your Big Shot. So it's really easy to think of your dies as using what comes cut out of the die. So for example, when you use this Christmas tree die, you get the Christmas tree, and then you kind of use the Christmas tree. But you could also use the negative of that. So I just use the negative as the mask, but you could also use the negative as a focal point. So let's say I wanted to put another tree like right here. I could do that, and then run it through my Big Shot, So here's what I'm left with, and I could mat this onto another piece of cardstock and color this cardstock underneath, or stamp a coordinating stamp inside. And then you can even take the one that you cut out and add it here and pop it up. So you have all this dimension on this one card. So that's another way to think of your dies. Now another fun thing you can do with large dies, like if you have a large circle, square, or any shape, is you can actually make that shape your card base. So I've got this oval by Simon Says Stamp with some stitching. And so I'm gonna make 2 of these. So I'm gonna run it through twice. After I've run this through twice, I'm gonna have 2 copies. And all you need to do is take one of them and score it at the top, about right here. I'm just going to score it. And this is going to be the back of my card because you don't want the front of your card to be scored. So what you'll do is you'll put a lot of tape runner on this top piece, and then you'll just match them up. Here we go. Okay, and then you will have your own new card base. And so you can decorate the front, and then the person just opens it like that. And I've done this on several cards, and this is really a fun technique. Another thing you can do is prepare some cardstock and then run it through your Big Shot. So I'm going to use some washi tape here, but you could use stamps, you could use different colored cardstock, but this is really super easy, and I'm just going to tape a bunch of lines together. Okay, and once you get that laid down, again, you can do different kinds of cardstock and just use some tape runner to put it on, or just stamp a bunch of lines of different, like a pattern or something, different colors. So I'm going to take my Christmas tree again, and I'll run it through, and then I have this really cool Christmas tree. It's got all different patterns in it. I've done this with snowflakes before, and it gets some like pretty different colors of blue, or it doesn't have to be blue, it could be anything. And just cut out a bunch of snowflakes, and you get a lot of detail because it is hard to sort of color in the snowflakes when a lot of them are intricate. So it's a good way to get some nice pattern into your dies. Now there are these products called Embosslits, and what they do is they cut and dry emboss, like this beautiful wings. They don't sell it anymore. Stampin' Up, you could check eBay. Sizzix has a bunch too, like here's a snowflake. So the snowflake that comes out of this, as you can see, is cut and dry embossed. So this product, you would use a sandwich of tab 1, acrylic plate, emboss it with the paper inside, then your acrylic plate again, and then you run it through the machine. Now there are also wafer thin dies that allow you to do dry embossing like this ice cream cone I showed you earlier. So this part is the dry emboss part, and then it cuts it around. So let me show you the sandwich you can use for the wafer thin dies that do this. Alright, so keep in mind that these wafer thin dies that have the embossing inside them are different than the ones that have stitching. Stitching actually makes a cut in your cardstock, and so you don't have to do anything extra. Just run it through your Sizzix as normal and you'll see the stitching. But with the ones that have the extra embossing, you'll have to do one extra step. And you'll see, if you look at the dies, that the pattern is actually lower and not at the same level as the cut. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to have tab 2. You're going to put your first acrylic plate down, and then you're going to put the die first. Typically I put my cardstock first, but in this situation you need to put the die first. And then you'll put your cardstock on top of that, and then your next acrylic plate, and run it through. Okay, once it's run through, you're going to remove the acrylic plate with the cardstock and the die off of your platform. And then, get off to the side here, then you'll take your platform and move to tab 1. Put it through your machine, get it ready, and then you're going to put your acrylic plate with just your cardstock. So I'm removing this top acrylic plate, and I'm going to replace it with something else. Now if you look at this, you'll see that it's just cut, but there's no dry embossing on it yet. So what I want to do is take my rubber, this is my rubber pad, and I'm going to place it, let me scoot this out a little. I'm going to put my rubber pad on top, and that's going to kind of squish into the paper to create the embossing. And then I'm going to take my Textures Impressions pad by Sizzix. And so I'm going to run that sandwich through. Okay, I'm going to show you how it came out. Now you can actually see where the areas were dry embossed. So when I pull that out of my die, you'll see that you now have some dry embossing besides just the cut. So I love those dies, they're really fun to use. Another technique you can use that's easily forgotten is inlay. So for example, I have this sun here by Lawn Fawn, and if I was going to create a scene on my card, I could run this through my Big Shot with my sun kind of in the upper right hand corner. So when I'm done, I have this sun in my card panel here. And what I can do is I can color this, maybe add another color. You can stamp a smiley face or maybe even spray it with some shimmer or whatever. So after you do that, you just put it right back where it came from. And to keep it into place, you can either place this whole thing on a card base carefully and just put it here, tape runner on the back. Or what I like to do to make sure it's perfectly in place is I bring out my surgical tape again, and I just tape it from the back where you're not going to see it. And that way I know it's not going anywhere. I do this with word dies especially to keep them in place. And then you have a nice, interesting look right inside your cardstock. So it's a die cut inlay. All right, one last technique I want to show you. It involves an embossing folder. I've got this snowflake embossing folder, and you can ink this up and run it through your Big Shot to get raised portions that are one color and then background portions that are a different color. So I'm going to use this snowflake one, and I am going to ink up the background. So what you want to do is you want to look where the background is raised up. On the other side is where the foreground is raised up. So if you want your raised up areas to be colored, you'd color that side. If you want your background areas to be colored, you'd color where the background is raised up. So I've never used this with my embossing folder before, so I thought it'd be a fun experiment. I'm going to take some ombre ink by Hero Arts, and I'm going to ink up the background. So I'm going to actually do dark in the middle. So I'm going to be careful here to make sure you don't get into the groove. So I'm going to go back and forth a little bit. Okay, and then I'm just going to flip my ink pad over so that this dark is still in the center. And I'm going to do the other side. Now that that's inked up, we're going to make our sandwich. All right, we've got tab 1. We've got an acrylic plate. Scoot this over a little bit. And then I'm going to take my inked up embossing folder, and I like to actually lay my paper down on the clean side. That way I don't put it down in the wrong place and mess up the whole thing. And then I'm going to close the folder carefully. Okay, and you want to do this in your machine so you don't have to be lifting things up when you're trying to get it closed. All right, and then I'll put my next plate down. And then I'm going to run it through. After I run that through, let's see what it looks like. Not bad, it's pretty. I like it. It's got a little bit of ink there. Maybe I moved it around, I must have pressed too hard, but you get the idea. So if you wanted something, you could use different colors. I've done ornaments before where I've had like blue, green, and purple, and I just kind of put some distress inks and blended them all together. But experiment with it. It comes out pretty. I like the way that looks. Anyway, so just another technique you can use. Well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed those techniques and they inspire you to do some new projects. If you'd like to see more, you can go to my website at www.livelovecards.com. Thanks for watching.